Welcome back to the DC Rap interview series. I'm Pat Pobletti with WisPolitics.com, and joining me today is U.S. Representative Glenn Grothman from Wisconsin's 6th Congressional District. Congressman, how are you?
Glad to be on the show. We're sitting here in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. We'll be headed back to Washington later tonight.
So, as you mentioned, you're here in the state. You are here with Vice President Mike Pence, who made his 4th trip to the state this year. Congressman, so you were on hand for a couple of the events that he was participating in Milwaukee. What did you make of those? And I guess further, what do you think that these frequent stops in the state kind of portend towards the election in November?
Well, first of all, it's always good to see President Trump or Vice President Pence in Wisconsin. I think it's a long time since we've received such attention. You know, I remember when incumbents ran in the past, it really wasn't emphasized as much. And I think the fact that they realized the importance of Wisconsin is a real feather in our cap. Obviously, Vice President Pence was in town yesterday to deal with the faith community, and President Trump has been very positive towards the Christian, religious, Jewish folks there as well yesterday, the religious aspect of American life. And I think with regard to issues that are important to conservative people of faith, President Trump has really become a hero.
So to shift back to DC just for a moment here, both House Dems and Senate Republicans are pushing bills that seek to reform some aspects of policing. Where do you stand on the bill that's in your chamber? Obviously, we've had some news break today about what's going on in the Senate, but in terms of the House, where do you stand on that bill? And where do you think the divide, do you think there's an ability, I guess, to bridge the divide between those two pieces of legislation?
Well, first of all, I've long realized that there are a few policemen who ought to be removed. When I was in the state legislature in 2008, I introduced a bill that I think would have solved so many of our problems with regard to bad police. There are bad ones that have to be eliminated, and to a certain extent, because of the influence, and I'm with the cops very much, we're going to deal with that in a second, but to a certain extent, due to the influence of some police unions, it's been hard to get rid of a bad officer. And maybe we wouldn't have the travesty we had in the Twin Cities if we wouldn't have had protections for this guy who caused the death. So I understand that as being a problem. On the other hand, this bill that I'm going to have to vote on tomorrow, or appears like I'm going to vote on tomorrow, is a horrible bill. It would be devastating to our law enforcement community. To get rid of qualified immunity would put police in a situation in which they had to stop and think, every time I arrest somebody, every time I have to get physical with somebody, am I going to be sued? And who would want to be a policeman in that situation? And how effective would a police department be? You know, people are saying, oh, we're not going to defund the police. That's fine. But to pass this bill is almost like defunding the police. They are also doing a job of keeping track of a lot more data with regard to police that I think are going to make police timid as to who they arrest, timid with regard to pulling somebody over. And as the result, they may not arrest people who society would be better off having arrested. They may let people go by when they should be pulled over, and maybe they could be saving lives that way too. I think one of the problems, by the way, throughout this whole debate is people aren't focusing on the huge number of people who are dying in this country at a time when there are cutbacks in police. Look at our city of Milwaukee. You know, what do we have? 25, 30 more murders this year than last year? Do any of these Black Lives Matter people care about those folks at all? Look at what's going on in Chicago this year, the number of murders versus last year. Now that we have a kind of a very much of an anti-police mayor in Chicago. Does anybody care about the, whatever it is, 50 or so, maybe more than that, murders that have been up in Chicago this year? Are the Black Lives Matter people protesting those murders? They don't care. And it looks like, for me, like this bill I'm going to have to vote on tomorrow, it was drafted by people who are spending all day reviewing that horrific video from Minnesota, but don't display a lot of concern about the huge amount of crimes that police officers prevent.
Now, to shift gears one more time, you were recently named the ranking member of the House Oversight Reform Committee's National Security Subpanel. Now, right. Obviously, it's a interesting time to be in Congress right now. 5 months ahead of an election. Do you think there's anything you can accomplish in that role during this particular term, or is this something you're looking at more long term?
Well, both. I mean, it does deal with Homeland Security. It does deal with the border, which is a very important thing. I've been to the border 4 times in the last 2 years. I think a lot of the committees, sadly, like too many committees, have become kind of partisan. People try to use the committee to tear down President Trump. But I think the fact that I am ranking member, I'm able to ask questions and speak a little bit more when the subcommittee does meet, gives me an opportunity to bring out to America or educate America both the problems at the border and what more things we have to do. We also dealt with an interesting committee on Afghanistan. I've never been a big fan of American involvement in Afghanistan, but it gives me an opportunity to, I think, defend President Trump's position where he's kind of backed off on foreign engagement compared to President Obama.
Lastly, I want to leave a little bit of time here at the end for you at least, to touch on anything you might be working on, anything we didn't quite get to that you might want to highlight.
Well, I think with regard to the COVID, I've tried to use my platform to talk about vitamin D. It's not necessarily a specific piece of legislation, but I really believe the Center for Disease Control should publicize the benefits of vitamin D more, and maybe we can save more lives out there. I am working on the education committee to try to steer people towards more skills-based education. And while a lot of bills may not pass in the final 7 months, I do try to do what I can to educate parents and children. If you're going to go for a degree, make sure you get a skill with that degree. And there's particularly high demand in the manufacturing field, the construction field, and medical fields.
Congressman, thanks so much for joining me, and have a safe trip back to Washington.
Glad to be on the show.